I need your ID now. Don't play smart. You people always think rules don't apply to you.
I am a federal prosecutor.
You think you could talk your way out of this? Cooperate.
This is my home. You are breaking the law.
At 6:14 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in Bethesda, Maryland, Federal Prosecutor Vanessa Achebe was loading her briefcase into the back seat of her car in her own driveway. She was 44 years old, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, heading to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Washington, D.C., where she served as a senior trial attorney in the Civil Rights and Public Corruption Division. She had spent the last 16 years prosecuting dirty cops, abusive federal agents, and officials who believed their authority placed them above the law. Her conviction rate was one of the highest in the office. Her husband, Colonel Idris Achebe, was an Army JAG officer currently deployed overseas. Their two children, 9-year-old Naomi and 12-year-old Elijah, were still asleep inside the house. The street was quiet. Sprinklers clicked across a neighbor's lawn. A woman 3 doors down walked a golden retriever along the sidewalk. The houses were large, well-kept, set back from the road with mature trees and clean driveways. It was the kind of neighborhood where nothing ever happened. Vanessa placed her coffee on the roof of the car and checked her phone. She had a 9 a.m. briefing on a police misconduct case and 3 depositions later in the week. She didn't notice the black SUV turning onto her street. She didn't see the white van behind it. By the time she looked up, they were already parked, and the morning she had planned was already over. A black, unmarked Chevrolet Suburban and a white government van stopped 2 houses short of Vanessa's driveway. 4 men stepped out. The lead agent was Craig Burnham, 46, a supervisory detention and deportation officer with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. He had been with ICE for 18 years, most of them spent running aggressive sweep operations across the D.C. metro area. His internal file held a pattern his supervisors had chosen to ignore. Sealed complaints for excessive force, warrantless entries, and a documented habit of targeting mixed-race households and immigrant-adjacent communities. None of it had ever resulted in discipline. His second was Agent Dale Fenton, 31, 5 years on the job, a man who had built his short career by mirroring Burnham's worst instincts without question. 2 junior agents stayed near the vehicles. Burnham held a printed photograph and a target address. The address belonged to a 62-year-old Guatemalan woman who had missed an immigration hearing after being hospitalized. She lived 3 streets away. But Burnham never verified the house number. He saw Vanessa, a black woman, standing in the driveway of a home he assumed matched his paperwork. He didn't cross-check. He didn't pause. He folded the paper into his vest pocket and started walking up the driveway. Burnham reached the top of the driveway and stopped 5 feet from Vanessa. His posture was wide, one hand resting on his belt, the other pointing directly at her. "I need you to identify yourself. Name and date of birth. Now." Vanessa set her phone down on the roof of the car beside her coffee. Her voice was calm. "Who are you, and why are you on my property?" Burnham flashed a credentials wallet in a quick motion, too fast to read the name or agency seal, then snapped it shut. "Federal enforcement operation. I need your identification immediately." Vanessa didn't move. "Do you have a warrant?" "We don't need a warrant," Burnham said. Vanessa looked at him, then at Fenton, who had moved to her right, positioning himself between her and the driver's side door. She turned back to Burnham. "I'm a senior trial attorney with the United States Attorney's Office, Civil Rights Division, and yes, you do need a warrant to be on my property demanding identification. So I'll ask again, do you have one?" Burnham's expression didn't change, but his jaw shifted slightly. "A lot of people claim to be a lot of things, ma'am. That doesn't change what's happening here. I need your name, and I need your cooperation. You're on private property without a warrant, without probable cause, and without my consent," Vanessa said. "I'm asking you to leave." Burnham didn't step back. He stepped closer. Fenton mirrored the movement from the side, his hand now resting on the grip of his holstered weapon. Neither of them had any intention of leaving. And Vanessa, who had spent her career standing across from men exactly like this in federal courtrooms, understood in that moment that what was happening on her driveway was no longer a conversation. It was a confrontation. Vanessa reached into the open back seat of her car and pulled her Department of Justice credentials from the outer pocket of her briefcase. She held them up, badge and photo ID visible. "I am a federal prosecutor. This is my home. You have no warrant, no probable cause, and no authority to be here." Burnham glanced at the credentials for less than a second. He didn't read the name. He didn't look at the photo. He looked back at her face. "Put your hands on the vehicle." Vanessa kept the credentials raised. "I'm not going to do that. You have no legal basis to detain me. I'm citing the Fourth Amendment, unreasonable search and seizure. You are in violation of it right now." Fenton leaned toward Burnham and muttered, just loud enough for Vanessa to hear, "Those can be faked. You can buy those online." Vanessa's eyes moved to Fenton, then back to Burnham. "You're looking at an authenticated DOJ credential with a federal bar number. I suggest you verify it before you do something you cannot undo." Burnham closed the distance. His right hand shot forward and locked around Vanessa's left wrist. She didn't pull away. Her voice stayed level, but rose in volume. "You are assaulting a federal officer of the court on her own property without a warrant." He twisted her arm behind her back. Her shoulder torqued. She exhaled hard, but didn't scream. Across the street, a door opened. Howard Alston, 71, a retired federal appellate judge who had served 28 years on the bench, stepped onto his front porch. He raised his phone and began recording without a word. Next door, another door opened. Dominic Quarles, 53, a former Secret Service agent who had spent 20 years on presidential details, walked down his front steps and stopped at the edge of the driveway. His voice cut across the morning air. "Take your hands off that woman right now." Burnham didn't turn around. Fenton looked over his shoulder at the growing audience, but said nothing. And Vanessa, her arm pinned behind her back, her suit pulling at the shoulder seam, stood completely still. Not because she couldn't resist, but because she knew exactly what would happen to a black woman who fought back against federal agents in her own driveway. Burnham drove his weight forward and forced Vanessa down. Her knees hit the driveway first, then her hip, then her cheek against the cold pavement beside her own car. The fabric of her suit tore at the knee. Her briefcase fell from the back seat and landed open next to her. Fenton moved in and pressed his palm into her shoulder blade, pinning her flat. Burnham pulled her wrists together behind her back and snapped the cuffs on. The click echoed off the garage door. Vanessa did not struggle. She did not raise her voice. She spoke clearly, loud enough for every camera and every neighbor now standing on their lawns to hear. "My name is Vanessa Achebe. I am a senior trial attorney with the United States Attorney's Office, Civil Rights Division. My DOJ employee number is 77431. I do not consent to this detention. I do not consent to this search. I have not been shown a warrant." Near the vehicles at the curb, one of the junior agents had unfolded the operational paperwork and was scanning it with a flashlight. He looked at the house number on the mailbox, then back at the sheet. He walked quickly toward Fenton and said something low, close to his ear. "The address doesn't match. This isn't the target residence." Fenton glanced at the paper for half a second, then looked away. He said nothing. He kept his hand on Vanessa's shoulder. Burnham stood up and keyed his radio. "This is Unit 4. We have a non-compliant subject in custody at the location, requesting transport for processing." Vanessa turned her head against the pavement. "I am compliant. I am not resisting. You are making a mistake that will follow you for the rest of your career." Then the front door of the house opened. Naomi Achebe, 9 years old, barefoot in cotton pajamas, stepped onto the front porch. She saw her mother face down on the driveway, wrists cuffed behind her back, 2 men standing over her. She screamed. The sound cut through the entire street. Howard Alston's phone, still recording from across the road, caught every second of it. The child's cry, the mother on the ground, the agents who didn't even look up. Vanessa's voice broke through the stillness that followed her daughter's scream. Do not enter my home. You do not have a warrant. I do not consent. Burnham ignored her. He looked at Fenton and gestured toward the front door. Secure the premises. Make sure no one else is inside. Fenton stepped over the threshold and pushed past Naomi, who was frozen on the porch, tears streaming down her face, one hand gripping the doorframe. The junior agent followed, his expression tight, his eyes already scanning the hallway as though he knew they shouldn't be there. Inside, the house was quiet except for the sound of footsteps on hardwood. Family photos lined the staircase wall, framed diplomas. A wedding portrait. Fenton moved into the kitchen and started opening drawers. The junior agent checked the living room, glancing at a bookshelf filled with legal texts and military histories. Then a voice came from the top of the stairs. Mom? Elijah Achebe, 12 years old, stood on the landing in a t-shirt and basketball shorts, eyes wide. Fenton pointed at him. Come down here. Sit on the floor. Hands where I can see them. Elijah descended slowly, lowered himself to the hallway floor, and placed his palms flat on the wood. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He stared straight ahead at the wall across from him, where his father's official army portrait hung in a polished frame. Colonel Idris Achebe in full dress uniform, ribbons across his chest, American flag behind his shoulder. Next to it hung a row of framed commendations. A photo of Vanessa shaking hands with a United States senator, another of her being sworn in by a federal judge, right hand raised, left hand on the Constitution. Fenton stopped in front of the wall. His eyes moved across the frames. The junior agent appeared beside him and whispered, We need to leave, right now. Fenton didn't answer. He turned and walked back toward the front door. Outside, Burnham stood over Vanessa, radio in hand, watching the neighbors multiply on their porches and lawns. He told her she would be transported to a federal processing facility. She turned her head and looked up at him with an expression that held no fear, only certainty. You're going to lose everything over this. Every badge, every pension, every year you put in. All of it. Gone. Burnham stared down at her, and for the first time since he had stepped onto that driveway, something behind his eyes shifted. Howard Alston had not stopped recording, but his other hand had already been busy. From his porch, phone braced against the railing, he had made 3 calls in under 4 minutes. The first went to Judge Eleanor Voss, a sitting federal judge on the D.C. Circuit who had served alongside Alston for 9 years before his retirement. The second went to the director of the ACLU's Washington office, a woman he had known for 2 decades. The third went to a senior investigative reporter at the Washington Post. To each of them, he said the same thing. ICE agents have a federal prosecutor in handcuffs in her own driveway. No warrant. Her children are inside. I'm recording everything. At the curb, Dominic Quarles had moved his body directly between the black SUV and the street, blocking any departure. He held his phone at chest level, recording steadily, narrating in a calm, trained voice. I am a retired United States Secret Service agent. I am witnessing what appears to be an unlawful detention of a civilian on her own property by federal agents who have not produced a warrant. There are 2 minor children inside the residence. Agents have entered the home without consent. 2 more neighbors stepped out. The first was a young woman named Sonia Pfeiffer, 29, a congressional staffer who worked for a member of the House Judiciary Committee. She stood on the sidewalk with her arms crossed, watching in silence, already composing a message to her office on her phone. The second was Renata Molina, 52, a practicing immigration attorney who had handled hundreds of removal cases. She walked directly up to Burnham. Officer, you are in violation of the 4th Amendment, 8 U.S.C. Section 1357, and ICE Directive 11072.1, regarding sensitive locations and warrantless operations. I am documenting every action you take from this point forward. Burnham looked at her. Ma'am, I need you to step back and disperse. Nobody moved. Not Alston on his porch. Not Quarles at the curb. Not Molina 3 feet from Burnham's face. Not Pfeiffer on the sidewalk. And 7 blocks away, inside the U.S. Attorney's office, Vanessa's desk phone had been ringing unanswered for 15 minutes. Her deputy checked the clock and picked up the internal line. The call came in at 7:02 a.m. Vanessa's deputy, a career prosecutor named Lionel St. Pierre, had tried her cell 3 times with no answer. She had never missed a morning check-in, not once in 6 years. He called the DOJ's Internal Security Division. Within 8 minutes, a security officer confirmed that no authorized federal operation had been scheduled in Vanessa's neighborhood that morning. No warrant had been issued with her name or address. No interagency coordination had been filed. By 7:14, the DOJ's Office of the Inspector General had been looped in. By 7:19, a senior DOJ official, whose name would never appear in any public report, picked up a secure line and called ICE headquarters directly. The message was 5 sentences long. You have one of our senior prosecutors in handcuffs in her own driveway. There is no warrant. There is no probable cause. Her children are inside the home. Explain immediately. The ICE field office scrambled. Calls overlapped. Supervisors who had approved Burnham's morning operation without reviewing his target file were now reading it for the first time. Burnham's cell phone rang. His supervisor's voice was tight. Release her. Now. Burnham kept his grip on the radio. She was non-compliant. The situation isn't, release her now and do not say another word. Do you understand me? Not one word. Burnham stared at the phone for a moment, then walked to where Vanessa still lay on the driveway. He knelt down and unlocked the cuffs without speaking. Then he spoke anyway. This could have gone differently if you just cooperated. Vanessa sat up slowly. Her wrists were bruised and red. Her knee was bleeding through the torn fabric of her suit. Her daughter was still crying inside the house. Her son was still sitting on the hallway floor with his hands flat in front of him. 38 minutes had passed since Burnham first walked up her driveway. She looked at him and said nothing. She didn't need to. Everything that was coming for him was already in motion, and every second of it had been recorded. Vanessa sat on the front steps of her own home with her children on either side of her. Naomi pressed into her mother's arm and would not let go. Her small fingers gripped the torn fabric of Vanessa's sleeve, squeezing as though letting go meant it would all happen again. Her face was swollen from crying. Elijah sat on the other side, silent, staring at the place on the curb where the black SUV had been parked. He hadn't spoken a word since Fenton told him to sit on the floor of his own hallway. His hands still rested flat on his knees, palms down, exactly the way he had been ordered to hold them. He was 12 years old, and he had not moved them since. Vanessa's wrists were red and bruised where the cuffs had bitten into her skin. Her right knee bled slowly through the torn charcoal fabric of her suit. Her briefcase still lay open on the driveway where it had fallen. Howard Alston crossed the street carrying a glass of water. He sat down beside her without asking and handed it over. His voice was low. I have 14 minutes of footage, Vanessa. Every second. From the moment he touched you to the moment he took the cuffs off. Dominic Quarles walked up the driveway, phone still in hand. I have it from the street angle, full audio. They entered your home without consent, without a warrant, and without exigent circumstances. Renata Molina appeared beside him and handed Vanessa a single sheet of paper. It was a handwritten summary of every legal violation she had observed, organized by statute, time-stamped from memory. Vanessa looked at it, folded it carefully, and placed it in her jacket pocket. By 8 a.m., she had spoken with the Inspector General's office by phone, retained outside counsel through a former colleague at a civil rights firm, and emailed her supervisor a preliminary incident report with 5 attachments. She did not go to work that day. She drove her children to their pediatrician and requested trauma screening for both of them. Naomi held her arm the entire way. Elijah sat in the back seat and said nothing. By noon, the Department of Justice Inspector General had opened a formal investigation into the conduct of ICE agents at the Achebe residence. The Department of Homeland Security's Office of Professional Responsibility was notified and assigned a parallel review. ICE's Office of Principal Legal Advisor received a federal preservation order covering all body camera footage, GPS vehicle tracking logs, radio transmissions, operational planning documents, and the target file Burnham's unit had used that morning. The operational file was damning before anyone even reached the footage. The target was a 62-year-old Guatemalan grandmother named Lucia Estrada Vélez, who had missed a scheduled immigration hearing 3 months earlier because she had been hospitalized for a cardiac episode. Her address was listed clearly on every page of the file. It was 3 blocks from Vanessa's home. A different street, a different house number. Vanessa's name, address, and photograph appeared nowhere in any document. Burnham had gone to the wrong house and had never checked. Federal investigators then pulled Burnham's body camera records. His camera had not been activated during the operation. A review of his equipment history revealed that his body camera had failed to record during 7 of his prior complaints, every single one involving allegations of excessive force or racial targeting. The pattern was no longer deniable. But the 2 junior agents assigned to the operation had activated their cameras when they exited the van. Their footage captured everything. The approach, the demand for identification, Vanessa holding up her DOJ credentials, Burnham grabbing her wrist, the takedown on the driveway, Fenton pinning her shoulder to the pavement, the cuffs snapping shut, the front door opening, Naomi stepping out in her pajamas, the scream, the agents pushing past a crying child to enter a home they had no legal right to be inside. A 12-year-old boy ordered to sit on the floor of his own hallway with his hands visible. The footage was 22 minutes long, and every frame of it was now in federal hands. Federal investigators pulled Craig Burnham's full personnel file within 48 hours. What they found was not a single lapse in judgment. It was a pattern that stretched across nearly 2 decades. 14 formal complaints had been filed against Burnham during his career with ICE. The allegations were consistent: excessive force, racial targeting, warrantless entries into private residences, verbal intimidation of subjects and their families. 6 of those complaints had been filed by immigration attorneys representing clients Burnham had detained. 3 came from community advocacy organizations documenting patterns in his unit's operations. 2 had been filed by other federal employees who witnessed his conduct during joint operations and found it alarming enough to put on record. Every single complaint had been administratively closed without discipline. Not one resulted in a suspension, a reprimand, or even a formal counseling session. Fenton's file was thinner, but told the same story from a different angle. In every operation where a complaint had been filed against Burnham, Fenton had been present. His behavior mirrored Burnham's precisely. The same language, the same posture, the same refusal to de-escalate. He had never once intervened, questioned an order, or filed an internal concern. Then the emails surfaced. An internal correspondence chain between Burnham's field supervisor and a regional operations director included a message dated 14 months before the Achebe incident. The supervisor described Burnham as aggressive but effective, gets numbers, doesn't leave empty-handed. The message made clear what ICE leadership had valued: arrest statistics, closure rates, not constitutional compliance, not civil rights, not the law Burnham had sworn to uphold. Investigators interviewed the junior agent who had flagged the wrong address on the morning of the arrest. His statement was direct. He told them he had checked the operational paperwork against the house number while Burnham was detaining Vanessa. He walked to Fenton and told him the address did not match. Fenton's response, captured on the junior agent's own body camera audio, was 4 words: "Shut up and hold the perimeter." The junior agent returned to the van. He did not intervene further, but he also did not turn off his camera. Howard Alston provided his 14 minutes of footage to the Washington Post the following evening. The paper published its story the next morning under a front-page headline that would be read in every newsroom, congressional office, and federal agency in Washington. ICE agents arrest black federal prosecutor in her own driveway without a warrant. The footage went online at the same time. Within 6 hours, it had been viewed more than 2 million times. Cable networks ran segments on loop throughout the day, cycling between Alston's porch footage, Dominic Quarles' street-level recording, and stills pulled from the junior agent's body cameras that had been entered into the federal record. One image dominated everything. Naomi Achebe, 9 years old, barefoot in cotton pajamas, standing in the doorway of her own home, mouth open, screaming, while her mother lay face down on the driveway, in handcuffs 10 feet away. That image was shared across every platform, reprinted in every major newspaper, and projected on screens during 3 separate cable news panels before the end of the first day. It became a symbol that no official statement could contain. Civil rights organizations filed amicus briefs supporting the federal investigation and demanding expanded oversight of ICE field operations. The Congressional Black Caucus issued a formal statement calling for immediate congressional hearings. 3 sitting senators sent a joint letter to the Secretary of Homeland Security demanding Burnham's termination, Fenton's termination, and a full operational audit of Burnham's unit going back 5 years. ICE headquarters released a statement 36 hours after the story broke. It called the incident an operational error currently under review and expressed the agency's commitment to professional standards and accountability. The public response was immediate and furious. Operational error did not explain a man grabbing a federal prosecutor on her own property. It did not explain cuffs on a woman who had shown her DOJ credentials. It did not explain agents entering a home without a warrant and ordering a 12-year-old boy to sit on the floor. And it did not explain the sound of a 9-year-old girl screaming on camera while 4 grown men stood over her mother and did nothing. The phrase operational error trended online for 2 days, not as a defense, as an indictment. A federal grand jury convened 6 weeks after the incident and returned indictments against both agents. Craig Burnham was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law under 18 U.S.C. Section 242, unlawful entry of a private residence, assault on a federal official, and filing a false operational report. The false report charge stemmed from Burnham's post-incident documentation in which he described Vanessa as a non-compliant subject who refused to identify herself and exhibited hostile and evasive behavior. Every word of it was contradicted by 3 separate video recordings and the testimony of 6 civilian witnesses. Dale Fenton was indicted on the same charges minus the false report, with an additional count of conspiracy to deprive civil rights. Prosecutors argued that Fenton had received direct information from the junior agent that the address was wrong, had ignored it, and had continued participating in an unlawful detention and warrantless entry with full knowledge that no legal basis existed for either. The 2 junior agents cooperated fully with federal investigators from the first interview. Neither was charged. One had provided the body camera footage voluntarily before being asked. The other had given a written statement confirming the address discrepancy and Fenton's instruction to shut up and hold the perimeter. Burnham's field supervisor was referred for administrative action on charges of failure to supervise and enabling a documented pattern of civil rights abuse through sustained inaction on complaints. He was not criminally charged, but was stripped of his supervisory role and placed on unpaid leave pending a disciplinary board review. Within the same month, Burnham was terminated from ICE. Fenton was terminated the following week. 3 additional supervisors in the D.C. field office were disciplined for their roles in the systemic mishandling of prior complaints. 1 was forced into early retirement. 2 were demoted and reassigned to administrative positions with no operational authority. The D.C. field office of ICE was placed under a federal consent decree requiring independent oversight of all future enforcement operations, warrant verification protocols, and mandatory review of any complaint involving allegations of racial targeting or excessive force. The consent decree would remain in effect for a minimum of 5 years. The office that had once described Burnham as aggressive but effective was now answering to a federal monitor who would review every operation before it left the building. The trial of Craig Burnham began on a Monday in the E. Barrett Prettyman United States Courthouse in Washington, D.C. It lasted 2 weeks. The prosecution's case was built around 22 minutes of body camera footage recorded by the two junior agents. The jury watched it in full on the first day. They saw Burnham approach Vanessa in her driveway. They heard her identify herself calmly as a federal prosecutor. They watched her hold up her DOJ credentials. They saw Burnham glance at them for less than a second and order her to put her hands on the vehicle. They watched him grab her wrist. They watched him twist her arm behind her back and force her to the pavement beside her own car. They heard the sound of her knees striking the concrete. They saw Fenton press her shoulder flat to the ground. They heard the cuffs click. They heard Vanessa recite her name, her title, her employee number, and her refusal to consent, all while face down on her own driveway. And then they heard the front door open. They saw Naomi step out, and they heard the scream. Several jurors looked away. One pressed a hand to her mouth. The footage continued. Fenton pushing past the child. Elijah ordered to the floor. Agents opening drawers in a home they had no warrant to enter. The wall of photographs and commendations that told them exactly whose house they were standing in. Use of force experts testified over 3 days that there was zero legal or tactical justification for any physical contact with Vanessa. She had identified herself, she had presented credentials, she had not made any threatening movement. Constitutional law professors walked the jury through the Fourth Amendment violations point by point. Warrantless seizure of a person, warrantless entry into a home, absence of probable cause, absence of exigent circumstances. Vanessa testified on the 9th day. She was precise, composed, and unshakable under cross-examination. She described the stop, the demands, the grab, the takedown, the cuffs, the sound of her daughter's voice. She did not raise her voice once. Burnham's defense argued he had been following standard operational protocols and had made a good-faith mistake based on the information available to him. The prosecution dismantled this in closing by displaying the operational file side by side with Vanessa's actual address. The numbers were not close. They were not even on the same street. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They returned guilty verdicts on every count. Burnham stood motionless as the verdicts were read. Fenton, who had pleaded guilty 2 weeks before the trial in exchange for a reduced sentence, sat in a separate courtroom awaiting his own sentencing. Burnham received 5 years and 4 months in federal prison. Fenton received 2 years and 8 months. The judge, before closing the proceedings, spoke directly from the bench. The Constitution does not have an exception for expediency. It does not have a carve-out for haste, for assumption, or for the arrogance of men who believe a badge exempts them from the law. You terrorized a family in their home because you could not be bothered to check an address. And when you were told you had the wrong house, you did not stop. That is not an error. That is a choice. And today, that choice has consequences. Vanessa filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against ICE, the Department of Homeland Security, Craig Burnham, and Dale Fenton. The complaint cited unlawful detention, excessive force, warrantless entry, assault on a federal official, and intentional infliction of emotional distress on 2 minor children. The evidence was so overwhelming that settlement negotiations lasted less than 3 weeks. The case settled for $4.2 million and sweeping institutional reforms. Mandatory warrant verification protocols requiring agents to confirm target addresses against 2 independent sources before any enforcement action. GPS address confirmation for all operations. Body camera activation as a non-negotiable condition of employment, with automatic termination for any agent who deactivated or failed to record during an operation. And an independent civilian review board with full authority over complaints involving racial profiling or excessive force, reporting directly to the DHS Inspector General and bypassing the chain of command that had protected Burnham for 18 years. Colonel Idris Achebe returned from deployment 5 weeks after the trial. He stood beside his wife at a press conference on the courthouse steps, in full dress uniform, their children between them. He did not speak. He did not need to. Vanessa returned to the U.S. Attorney's Office and was promoted to Chief of the Civil Rights Division. She established a legal defense fund for families targeted by unlawful immigration enforcement. It took on 30 cases in its first 6 months. Naomi Achebe, in a 4th-grade essay, wrote 7 sentences that were viewed more than 4 million times. The last line read, "My mom fights for the Constitution every day. One morning, she had to fight for it in our own driveway." Weeks later, Vanessa walked into the federal courthouse carrying the same briefcase that had fallen open on her driveway that morning. Nothing about her stride had changed. The only difference was that now, when she told a jury no one is above the law, she carried the proof in the scars on her wrists. This case was brutal, but the case on the right spirals completely out of control.